You've been taught your entire life that being emotionally open makes you good, that availability equals connection, that giving your time, your attention, your explanations, even when you're tired, even when it hurts, is the right thing to do. And it doesn't seem wrong at first. You respond to messages right away. You explain yourself when someone misunderstands. You soften your tone to avoid upsetting people. You smile, even when you feel like disappearing. But here's the question you've probably never been asked. Has any of that actually given you peace? Or has it slowly made you invisible to yourself? You weren't just taught to be available. You were trained to feel guilty if you're not. It starts early. You're praised for being helpful, quiet, easy to talk to. But easy to talk to quickly becomes easy to unload on. And before long, you're carrying other people's stress, explaining your emotions in detail, and apologizing for simply needing space. You became emotionally reachable, and then you became emotionally predictable. And predictable people don't get protected, they get used. Because when everyone knows how to reach you, they stop wondering what you're feeling. They stop earning your energy. They just expect it. And here's the brutal part. They're not wrong to do so. You trained them. You taught the world that you would always respond, that you'd always explain, that they could press your buttons and you'd jump. And people respect boundaries, but they don't respect the absence of them. This is why some people seem powerful without ever raising their voice. It's not because they're cold or arrogant. It's because they're not constantly available. And in a world that demands constant access, that kind of distance becomes magnetic. So if you've ever felt like your kindness is being drained, if your silence gets mistaken for weakness, if you're tired of being emotionally open just to feel worthy, it's time to see what's really happening underneath. Because you were never meant to give yourself away to be valued. You were meant to choose when, how, and to whom your presence is given. And that changes everything. Some people enter a room, say nothing, and everyone notices. It's not their clothes. It's not their status. It's something harder to define, but impossible to ignore. It's presence. And the strange thing is, presence doesn't come from being loud, visible, or emotionally open. It comes from restraint. There's something deeply attractive about a person who doesn't explain themselves, who doesn't rush to be understood, who doesn't give away their inner world for approval. Because we don't crave what's familiar. We crave what we can't fully reach. And that's the paradox. The more available you are, the less people value what you offer. The more you withhold, the more they want to understand who you are. We've been told that transparency builds connection, that vulnerability is strength. And while that's true in the right context, it becomes dangerous when you're always emotionally open, especially with people who haven't earned it. Because connection without discernment is not intimacy, it's exposure. And exposure without boundaries doesn't bring closeness, it brings erosion. This is where distance becomes powerful, not as a defense, but as a signal. A signal that you honor your own energy, that your presence is intentional, that not everyone gets a backstage pass to your inner world, and that quiet signal changes everything. When you stop over-explaining, you stop signaling insecurity. When you stop trying to please, you stop broadcasting need. And suddenly, the same people who used to overlook you pause. They look again, because mystery is the gravity of the soul. And presence, real presence, only begins when you stop giving yourself away. Carl Jung introduced the concept of the persona, the mask we wear to navigate society. It isn't inherently false. In fact, it's necessary. Without it, we would be constantly misunderstood or rejected by a world that demands coherence. But the danger lies in mistaking the mask for the self. The moment you start believing that your socially acceptable image is who you really are, you disconnect from your instincts, your depth, and your truth. Emotional overavailability is often a signal that the persona has taken over. When you're always eager to respond, constantly explaining and adapting your emotions to every situation, you're not connecting. You're curating, hoping that constant access will be interpreted as value, but it rarely is. What it earns is not closeness, but exhaustion. This exhaustion isn't dramatic, it's quiet. It shows up as resentment that has no clear source, a fatigue that no amount of rest can touch. It's the hollow feeling after conversations where you gave everything and received nothing real in return. And it happens because your attention has no filter. It goes to whoever reaches first. Your boundaries aren't broken. They're simply not there. Jung would call this a crisis of integration. You've exiled the parts of yourself that aren't pleasing, the anger, the detachment, the need for solitude, into the shadow. And by doing so, you weaken your own psychic architecture. Because power isn't found in constant emotional expression, nor is it found in suppression. It's found in containment, the ability to know what you feel and to decide when and how to share it. The tragedy is that this version of you, always ready, always open, often receives praise. You're seen as kind, easy to talk to, emotionally generous, but over time, the performance becomes unconscious. You stop choosing. You start compulsively reacting, and this reaction begins to replace identity. In psychological terms, this is the creation of the false self, a persona adapted entirely to external validation at the cost of inner coherence. And when that happens, even your best moments feel strangely disconnected. Because they weren't born from you, they were shaped for others. Emotional sovereignty is not something you're granted. It's something you reclaim by pausing, by protecting, and by refusing to perform for people who were never meant to define your worth in the first place. Desire is not born from what we fully possess. It emerges from tension, from absence, from distance, from the unknown. This is not just a romantic or emotional principle. It is a philosophical one. And perhaps no one understood this tension better than Søren Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard warned that the crowd, the collective voice of social opinion, dilutes the individual into conformity. The more we expose ourselves for approval, the more we dissolve into the expectations of others. What remains is not a self, but a performance. In this sense, to be constantly available is to disappear into the crowd. You become accessible not only physically, but existentially. Easy to categorize, easy to dismiss, easy to forget. Nietzsche approached the same phenomenon from a different angle. He believed that the highest form of power was mastery over oneself, not domination of others, but sovereignty of one's own instincts. For Nietzsche, the man who does not react is not weak. He is formidable. He is not owned by impulse. He chooses his moments. And in doing so, he becomes untouchable in a world obsessed with visibility. Jung adds a final layer. For him, the path to individuation, to becoming whole, involves integrating the shadow, the unseen, the parts of ourselves we suppress. This includes our capacity for detachment, our resistance to being defined, our refusal to overexpose our emotional landscape. Jung does not romanticize emotional distance, but he understands it as a necessary boundary in the process of psychic integration. To withhold is not to wither, it is to consolidate. All three thinkers, in their own way, circle the same insight: that what is overexplained loses its force, that what is always available loses its mystery, and that what is fully visible loses its depth. This is not an argument for manipulation or arrogance. It is a call for dignity. Dignity in how we reveal ourselves. Dignity in how we are known. The person who learns to delay their explanations, to withhold their immediate reactions, to retreat into inner silence before responding, that person creates presence. Not through performance, but through restraint. And it is precisely that restraint that creates desire. Because what cannot be easily consumed must be considered, and what must be considered is remembered. Not every boundary needs to be declared. Some are lived, quietly, in the way you take your time before responding, in the way you no longer feel the need to explain yourself to people who never really listened in the first place. You may have thought that setting boundaries meant confrontation, saying no, cutting people off, defending your choices. But the most powerful boundaries often don't make noise. They're not warnings, they're witnessed. You don't have to justify needing space. You don't have to ask permission to protect your peace. The moment you stop apologizing for being selective with your energy is the moment people begin to respect it. This is the turning point in emotional sovereignty, when you realize that self-protection is not selfishness. It's discipline. And more than that, it's clarity. Because not everyone deserves access to your vulnerability. Not every situation needs your full emotional presence. And not every discomfort needs to be solved through conversation. You are not responsible for being emotionally convenient to others. You're responsible for being aligned with yourself. There's a reason why peace feels unfamiliar at first. When you've spent years responding to every signal, every provocation, every shift in someone else's mood, silence feels like a risk. Distance feels like guilt. But with time, they become something else entirely. They become sacred. Boundaries aren't barriers, they're reflections. They show the world how you see yourself. And when you honor them, not loudly, not dramatically, but consistently, the world reorganizes around you. You stop attracting chaos. You stop being drained by need. And most importantly, you begin to see clearly who was only drawn to you when you had no filter, no guard, no sense of self-preservation. And that clarity, that's where your real freedom begins. You're not distant. You're focused. You're not emotionless. You're disciplined. You're not rejecting the world. You're choosing what enters yours. Some people will call that cold. Let them. Because most have never known the difference between repression and self-mastery, between silence that hides and silence that protects. You've lived the cost of never having emotional boundaries, always shaping yourself to be digestible, to be liked. And in doing so, you disappeared from yourself. What that bought you wasn't peace. It was the illusion of connection, the illusion of being understood, the illusion of being respected, because you were easy to reach. You don't need to be easily reached. You need to be deeply grounded. The truth is, people can only respect boundaries that you respect first. And once you begin to live from that place, where your silence is intentional, where your presence is a conscious gift, something shifts in the way the world responds to you. You're no longer a mirror for their projections. You're no longer a sponge for their emotions. You become still, centered, and therefore unshakable. This isn't about detachment for its own sake. It's about knowing what deserves your attention. It's about understanding that you don't need to prove your worth by being emotionally accessible at all times. You've done that. You've bled for that. And it left you feeling empty. But now you are no longer trying to be everything for everyone. You're learning to be enough, quietly, sovereignly, unmistakably, for yourself. This is not the absence of feeling. It's the presence of self-respect. And when you reach that place, where you can walk away without bitterness, where you can say nothing and still be heard, where your calm becomes your signature, you don't lose connection. You become magnetic. Because the rarest kind of presence is the one that chooses when and how to appear. If this resonated with you, like, share, and subscribe to The Existential Edge for more videos like this.